Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove, and this is part 4 of our 4-part series with Dr. Walter Semkiw on the subject of reincarnation. Dr. Semkiw, a medical doctor, is the founder and president of the Institute for the Integration of Science, Intuition, and Spirit. He has written several books on reincarnation, including Born Again, Return of the Revolutionaries, The Case for Reincarnation and Soul Groups Reunited, and Origin of the Soul and the Purpose of Reincarnation. Welcome again, Walter.
Thank you, Joe.
In this interview, I'd like to focus in on the process of integrating this kind of information. And let me start with an interesting case history. I think exemplifies potentially one of the most positive cases. I know it's not one of your cases, but I bring it up because years ago I interviewed Carol Ann Dreyer, a well-known psychic, and I can tell you it's one of the most popular interviews I ever did. Mm-hmm. She had the ability, as she put it, to see the soul, and she had many clients in Hollywood. One of her clients, whom I met, was Tina Turner, the singer. And Carol worked with Tina at a time when Tina wasn't really very famous. She was doing small shows in Las Vegas. She was basically a battered housewife at the time, carrying a huge personal debt. And Tina herself acknowledges this in her autobiography and the impact that Carol had on her, because Carol gave her a psychic reading in which Carol identified her past lifetime as the female Egyptian pharaoh Hatshepsut. And as a result of this, or perhaps not as a result, but at least following this, Tina's turned her life around. She got rid of her abusive husband and became a superstar, and has been a superstar ever since. Wrote a song called I Might Have Been Queen. So here's an example, whether or not we have any reason for acknowledging that Tina Turner resembles Hatshepsut in any way, because we don't know really that much about Hatshepsut. In any case, the idea that Tina might have been, I think, was quite instrumental, as she indicates in her own autobiography, of making a major change in her life. And you, in our previous interview, also described how the past life identification that you encountered over a period of many years wrought a change in your life, to the point where you're more of your passion is more for past life research than it is, I suppose, for the practice of medicine these days.
That's definitely true.
Yeah. Now, you've identified a past life for me as William James. And you and other people seem convinced of it. William James is a hero of mine. I don't know that it's changed my life dramatically. I kind of hope it would.
Well, you were pretty much living the life of William James before you knew it, and or before you recognized the past life connection. And you know, that's similar to the Laurel and Hardy cases, where they as children replicated the development, or a comedic development, of Laurel and Hardy unconsciously. And when I first called them out of the blue to tell them that they're the reincarnations of Laurel and Hardy, everybody was kind of shocked at first, because they were raised Jewish. They never considered reincarnation. And their
But they had a comedy act they were doing.
Yeah, they've been doing comedy ever since they were children. And here's it's almost surreal. They put together Laurel and Hardy music tracks. So music tracks from Laurel and Hardy music, they made cassettes out of. And they used to drive around New York City playing Laurel and Hardy theme music as the reincarnation of Laurel and Hardy, even though they didn't recognize they were the reincarnations of Laurel and Hardy. But their father is a trial attorney, and even though this seems, and he's Jewish, and even though this seems so outlandish at first, when they start to think about all the parallels, now the whole family totally supports it. I think it's a little different for me because I approached it with great skepticism because I was alone. I mean, I was I had this psychic experience of the voice telling me to study this lifetime. I didn't know if it was true or not. And kind of a turning point, basically there were too many things that matched for me to ignore. And then when I start to work with Kevin and Atun Ray, the spirit guide that Kevin channels affirmed it, and then Atun Ray could solve these cold cases where there was no hypotheses.
As we described in a previous interview.
Right.
Yes.
Then and also, I had started to accumulate other cases like the Jeff Keane case, the Robert Snow case, the Penny Pierce's cases, and many more. Really, my mission was not so much about me and who I was. It was actually to compile these cases and then later integrating them with Stevenson's research.
Well, let me say this, that you embody a certain revolutionary fervor in your zeal for promoting the philosophy of reincarnation. So there is a sense that you are still behaving as a revolutionary.
Oh, very much so. And there is a direct parallel. In the American Revolution, I helped bring about democracies. The fall of monarchies to establish democratic political systems. What evidence of reincarnation is doing is it's doing the same thing with the religious monarchies, which are the established religions. And when evidence of reincarnation becomes more widespread, and that really is the mission of our organization, is to disseminate the research of Ian Stevenson and others. When people realize that religion, nationality, and ethnic affiliation can change from lifetime to lifetime, and many cases from the University of Virginia show this, it's going to totally change how people see themselves and others. And then when you realize you reincarnate, and you could be the other. When Muslims realize they can reincarnate as Jewish people and vice versa, then this hostility or sense, basically what it comes down to is one's sense of identity. One's identity is based on cultural markers, such as the nation you were born into, the religion you were born into, and so forth. And that gets fixed usually when people are in their 20s. And then people will even fight about it. There's a Giants fan in San Francisco who traveled to LA to a Dodgers game and almost was beat to death because he was wearing a Giants jersey in Los Angeles, because these guys said, hey, this is our turf. And what's happening now with the ISIS causing all the warfare, it's basically my identity, my religion is correct and you're wrong, and you either have to become like us or we're gonna kill you. But evidence of reincarnation is gonna level the playing field. And it is also going to make established religions less powerful, and it will make people take individual responsibility for their lives.
That's a very optimistic viewpoint, and I hope it's true, but I think to be realistic about it, we can point to historical cultures where reincarnation was completely accepted, in Buddhism, for example, that also engaged in warfare.
But there's a big difference. Those religions do not acknowledge that you can change religion. First of all, Buddhism does not have any set understanding how reincarnation works. It's very abstract. Secondly, religions like Hinduism, they teach you come back as a Hindu. They do not change, they do not teach that a Hindu can become a Muslim.
Now, actually, there's some research that was done years ago on a small Hindu village near the Himalayas, where the people in that village believed they would come back as a Hindu, except if they were very bad people. Then they would be reborn as Americans.
Well, I don't know if that's a joke or not.
No, it sounds like a joke, but this was their belief.
But still, if you're a good Hindu, you come back as a Hindu, right? Well, that is not true. And that's the big fallacy. Also, there's a big difference between belief and reality. And there's a difference if you're a Hindu person who sort of believes in reincarnation, but you don't know. I mean, most people, for instance, what's interesting is I have a lot of friends in high tech in the Bay Area who are Hindus. Well, it turns out that Hindu academics, scientists, computer engineers, they don't believe in reincarnation. They see it as a religion, just like a Christian scientist would see Christianity as a religion, and even though they were born Christian, doesn't mean they believe in Christian beliefs.
I'm in a situation where I have you and Kevin Ryerson and the other people too who say, we think you were William James. I still don't believe it.
Well, that's because you're kind of dense. No, I'm kidding.
No, it's because, to be honest, and I think a William James scholar, any William James scholar would say at best I'm a pale reflection.
Well, first of all, it doesn't matter if you were William James or not. It doesn't matter if I was the person that I'm identified as. What really matters is the Stevenson research. And those cases are pretty much indisputable. You have to be a super skeptic or close-minded to reject that whole body of work.
No, let me just point out that Stephen Browdy, whose book Immortal Remains, he's not a super skeptic at all. He would like to believe in survival and in reincarnation, but he's looking at it through the eyes of a professional philosopher, and he's simply saying, as much as I might enjoy this prospect and think it might be true, can't rule it out, the evidence doesn't convince me yet. There are alternative hypotheses that he thinks carry actually more weight.
Well, I doubt that person really knows the body of literature. And that's all I can say. But let me put it this way.
I have to invite the two of you to dinner.
Now, one thing we have to recognize is there are people who are naturally skeptics that won't believe anything. Remember, Ian Stevenson himself said there is no proof other than mathematics. But let me tell you this. When I show these cases to my patients in my medical practice, they're blown away and they accept it. And I think most open-minded people, when you show them the body of evidence, will accept it. And by the way, there are two quotes that I really relate to from my past life. One is, we must risk all for the America to create a new nation. And I've risked all personally to get this going. And another quote is, thanks God that I am stubborn when I know that I am right. And I know that I am right.
Well, that is revolutionary fervor if ever I heard it. Let me suggest another potential scenario here. Vladimir Rykov is a psychiatrist from Russia whose work was written up in the famous book Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain. He had a process. Sometimes it was called deep trance identification. Sometimes it was called artificial reincarnation, where he would put people into a hypnotic trance and tell them that you are the spirit of, or you were the spirit of, let's say, Rembrandt, the great painter, or Mozart, the great musician. People would come out of trance and they would exhibit abilities that they had never previously shown before, artistic or musical abilities. So I'm assuming that just because the hypnotist said you are such and such a person, that it doesn't mean that they really were, but that the human subconscious mind has the potential to tap into that level.
Well, my explanation for that is mediumship.
Uh-huh.
And for instance, many conscious psychics, such
Yeah.
as John Edward, who had the TV show Crossing Over,
Yes.
he says that the way he works is he has a group of 4 spirit guides or so
Yep.
that he calls the boys.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the boys that collect information about the client, and the boys telepathically transmit this to John Edward,
Right.
who transmits it to the client. I would say that this hypnotist attracted a group of spirits because they know they're going to have an opportunity to come through this person in a hypnotic state and show their stuff. And one very similar occurrence like this involves Echo Bodine, who's a noted psychic in Minneapolis and has written many books. And she's actually a contributor to my book, Origin, the Soul and Purpose of Reincarnation. And by the way, and this story is actually in that book. And let me just say that Origin of the Soul and Purpose of Reincarnation consists of my dialogues with Atunre, the spirit being, about the big picture.
Okay.
Like, when were souls created? What's the purpose of reincarnation? When does reincarnation stop? What are soulmates? And so forth. So once I realized Atunre was truly a spirit who is highly intelligent,
Has a great sense of humor, too.
great sense of humor,
Yeah.
and compassionate. I mean, I consider him and Kevin my best friends. I mean, a best friend of mine is a spirit.
Okay.
I mean, I almost look forward to dying so I can hang out with him more. But anyway, what happened with Echo is both she and her brother both had psychic abilities early in life. And Echo made a career out of it. And they both together did ghost busting. So when somebody said they had a haunted house, they would go and kind of communicate with the spirits and say, go to the light or whatever, and de-haunt the house. Well, her brother, as a young person, wanted to play the drums. So he got a drum set. It was like in the basement or somewhere. And he would practice on the drums, but he was really pretty awful. You know, he was a beginner.
Yeah.
And, you know, they got used to his drumming and so forth. Well, one day he was playing his drums, and all of a sudden he transformed into like a super jazz drummer, and everybody in the families went like, what the heck is going on? You know, and they run down, and he's playing drums like he's never drummed, like an expert.
Right.
And then all of a sudden he stopped, and he was like as white as a ghost. And he himself was like scared. What happened to me? And basically what Echo perceived is that a spirit that was a professional drummer before actually took over the body of her brother temporarily to play the drums.
Possession, a case of possession.
Or mediumship. That's basically what Kevin does.
Well, there's a fine line, isn't there, between mediumship and reincarnation?
I don't think so. You know, for instance, when Kevin channels Atunre, you could say that Atunre temporarily is taking possession of Kevin.
Yes.
But then when the session is over, he's depossessed. That Atunre leaves Kevin's energy field, and Kevin comes back to being Kevin. Well, Kevin is not the reincarnation of Atunre.
The mystics of all cultures unanimously say that we're one with the whole universe, with everything.
Yeah.
So at that level, we are one with every soul who's ever lived.
Well, can I tell my squirrel story now?
All right.
Well, this is something that demonstrates this quite vividly. And I've always been skeptical about people who think they can communicate with animals, because how do you prove it? And I have these squirrels in my backyard that I've been feeding for years, and you know, even to the point where they touch me, and they're like my little pets. And and one day I was at work doing my medical job, doing some charting. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And out of nowhere, I see this vivid image of our deck where I feed the squirrels. There's a sliding glass door, and there's this squirrel that's as tall as the entire door. So we're talking about like an 8-foot squirrel, 7-foot squirrel. And it's looking at me like, what's going on? In fear, like asking for help. And then I heard myself telling the squirrel, well, at least she doesn't have her dogs. And I reflected, and that lasted for just a couple seconds, and I thought, that was weird. Why would I see this big squirrel, and why would I hear myself talking about these dogs? But I knew right away, I was thinking about my wife's niece's dog. She has these 2 Labradors that are just totally unruly, and I knew that that's what I was referring to, but I had no idea why this bizarre image came into my mind. Well, later I came home, and it turned out that my wife's niece was visiting her grandfather who was living with us.
And you didn't know that when you were at your office?
I didn't know that. And they were hanging out in the living room. The bedroom's on the other side of the house. She had opened the door and the screen for ventilation, was with her grandfather, then walked down the hall to go to the bathroom, and sees this squirrel halfway coming into the bedroom.
Which the squirrel was accustomed to doing because you feed the squirrels.
Yeah, I would encourage them to come in. Don't tell my wife, but I enjoyed it. And so they're my little buddies, and they're so cute the way they eat and everything, and I love them. And then when I came home, Nancy, the niece, said, boy, you know what happened? The squirrel came into the bedroom, and man, I yelled at that thing and chased it away, and that squirrel's never going to come back here again. And I said, what time did this happen? And it happened at the time I had this vision of the squirrel. So not only was the squirrel psychically communicating with me, part of my consciousness was communicating with the squirrel, even though in my body I had no idea what was going on. And later I asked Atun Ray about this, and he said yes, because all living things are interconnected. And I in actually my first book I talk about the web. And that's like when Jesus talks about the vine, that's what my interpretation is. It's like a universal interconnectedness.
So we're all connected, and yet I think what you're saying is that in addition to the fact that we're connected with everything, we also have past lives.
Yeah, we have our individual identities. And our spirits program, basically when we're born, how I think of it is our soul projects a template of itself into the physical body. It's an energy template, and that's what the tissue shapes around, which results in us having similar facial features from lifetime to lifetime. But this template also allows a path to download information and talent, which explains child prodigies and repetition of behavior.
Now let me ask you this question. Do you think it is useful for people to know their past lives? After all, most people, almost everybody, is born without memories of a past life.
I think that it doesn't necessarily have to it doesn't necessarily change your life. What I think is important is for people to be knowledgeable of the body of evidence that exists, which, and again, in aggregate, in my mind, these cases prove reincarnation. And Jim Tucker at the University of Virginia has stated there's sufficient evidence to conclude reincarnation exists. The important thing is for people to recognize you can change religion, nationality, ethnic affiliation, and let's stop fighting about this. Let's stop destroying infrastructure. If you know that you're going to be coming back, let's create a world we want to come back to.
So, if I could summarize one point, which I think is a useful point, and make sure that you concur, or if not, let me know. You would like people to really be more aware of the work of Ian Stevenson and his colleagues at the University of Virginia, who are using rigorous scientific methods to explore reincarnation. You
Right.
yourself have developed a fascinating approach involving the spirit guide Atunre. And I think you would probably agree that while these results are most interesting to you and many other people, they don't necessarily comply with scientific methodology.
Right, right. And I always say, and I'll be honest, I use the celebrity cases because we are a celebrity-driven culture. I mean, look at all the tabloids,
Yeah.
you know, and so people are going to be more interested in who, you know, Justin Bieber was in a past lifetime than this obscure Indian child, you know what I mean?
Well, Dr. Walter Semkiw, I'm very grateful that you spent these 4 interviews with me. We've covered a lot of ground, and I think that your work is of a pioneering nature.
Well, thank you, Jeff.
It goes beyond what most parapsychologists would do. They're too timid to engage in the sorts of exploration that you do, and they're too constrained by their own methods. But you seem to show great respect for their work and the willingness to concede that what you're doing is a different methodology.
Atunre said me, him, and Kevin made a contract to do this work before Kevin or I were born. And once I asked Atunre, or I mentioned to Atunre how I just go ahead and do things, you know, and I push ahead. And then Atunre said, well, why do you think you're working with me?
Walter, thank you so much for being with me.
Well, thank you, Jeff.
And thank you for being with us.
Thank you.